The Martinez family reunion was one of those traditions that never changed. Every July, more than 75 relatives gathered at Uncle Carlos's ranch in the Texas Hill Country, turning 5 quiet acres into a sea of laughter, music, and endless conversation. The air was filled with the sound of mariachi music drifting from old speakers, children racing through sprinklers under the hot summer sun, and the mouth-watering smell of carne asada sizzling on oversized grills. Aunts carried trays of homemade food between folding tables. Uncles argued about sports and politics, and cousins, who only saw each other once a year, picked up conversations as if no time had passed. That Saturday morning, Nina Martinez arrived after a 3-hour drive from Austin. Her 12-year-old Honda Accord rolled slowly down the gravel driveway coated with a thin layer of dust from the road. The trunk was packed with grocery bags and a large cooler containing her mother's favorite potato salad. Nina was exhausted. She had barely slept after spending most of the previous night on conference calls, but family obligations were family obligations, so she came anyway. The moment she stepped out of her car, she could feel the familiar eyes on her. "Nina, you made it," Aunt Carmen called out, wrapping her in a quick hug. "I was starting to think your little company was keeping you too busy for family." Nina forced a smile. Traffic was terrible. Before she could take 3 more steps, another voice interrupted. "You're still driving that old Honda?" Aunt Rosa asked, staring at the car with obvious concern. "Mija, when are you finally going to buy something newer?" Nina laughed politely. "It still works perfectly." "But it's ancient," her aunt replied. "You're almost 30. Successful people don't drive cars like that." The comments continued as she walked toward the house. "So have you bought a home yet?" "No. Still renting." "Yes. Does your company finally make money?" "We're doing fine." "Fine," another relative repeated. Fine doesn't sound very successful. Every year it was the same conversation. For 6 years, Nina had listened to relatives question every decision she made. They saw the small apartment she lived in, the old Honda she drove, and the simple clothes she wore. What they didn't see were the endless nights of work, the sacrifices, the risks, and the achievements she rarely talked about. They assumed that because she didn't flaunt wealth, she must not have any. Inside the kitchen, her mother was helping prepare lunch with several aunts and cousins. "Nina," her grandmother said as soon as she entered, "when are you going to stop playing entrepreneur and get a real job?" The room erupted with soft laughter. "She already has a real job, Mama," her mother said. "A startup isn't a real job," her grandmother replied. "A real job has stability, benefits, a future." Nina had heard those words hundreds of times. Across the room, her sister Gabriella walked in wearing an expensive designer dress, a massive diamond engagement ring sparkling under the kitchen lights. Gabriella worked at a prestigious law firm, had recently become engaged to a successful attorney, and had just purchased a beautiful house in one of Austin's most desirable neighborhoods. Everyone admired her. Everyone celebrated her. "Nina should learn from Gabriella," one aunt whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Now that's what success looks like." A few relatives nodded in agreement. As if that wasn't enough, her brother Miguel arrived moments later, surrounded by uncles, eager to hear about his latest real estate deals. Miguel had built a reputation as a rising star in commercial property sales, and every family gathering seemed to include another story about a $1 million transaction. "Did you hear?" one uncle said proudly. "Miguel just closed another huge deal." "Really?" another asked. "Several $1 million. The group erupted in applause. Standing quietly in the corner, Nina watched the scene unfold. Gabriella was the successful lawyer. Miguel was the real estate star. And Nina? In the eyes of most of her family, she was the cautionary tale. The daughter who had walked away from a secure career to chase an impossible dream. The relative who still rented a small apartment. The woman who still drove an old Honda. The entrepreneur who, according to family gossip, had spent 6 years building absolutely nothing. No one asked what her company actually did. No one asked how many people she employed. No one asked whether she was happy. Instead, they judged her based on appearances and assumptions. What made it hurt the most was that Nina had stopped trying to correct them years ago. Every time she mentioned her work, the conversation quickly shifted elsewhere. Every achievement was dismissed. Every milestone was ignored. Eventually, she learned that explaining herself was pointless. So she smiled, politely answered their questions with short responses, and allowed them to believe whatever they wanted. What none of them realized was that while they were measuring success through houses, cars, and engagement rings, Nina had been quietly building something far bigger than any of them could imagine. What made the constant criticism so frustrating was that none of Nina's relatives had any idea what she had actually sacrificed to build her company. To them, she was simply the family member who had made a bad career decision and spent 6 years stubbornly refusing to admit it. The reality could not have been more different. 6 years earlier, Nina had what most people would have considered a dream job. She worked as a healthcare IT consultant for a major technology company, earning a 6-figure salary with excellent benefit stock options and a career path that seemed almost guaranteed. Her parents loved telling relatives about her job. Her grandmother bragged about it to neighbors. Everyone agreed that Nina had finally achieved stability. Then she quit. Without warning, without a backup plan, without another job waiting for her. The announcement shocked everyone. "You're leaving a 6-figure salary to start a company?" her father had asked. "Yes. A healthcare AI company." "Yes. Do you even know how to build artificial intelligence?" "No," Nina admitted. Her mother nearly cried. Her relatives thought she had completely lost her mind. "You're throwing your future away," one uncle warned. "Most startups fail," another reminded her. "You'll be back looking for a job within a year," a cousin predicted. Nina listened to every warning and understood their concerns. The truth was that she was terrified too. But she had spent years watching hospitals struggle with diagnostic errors that cost thousands of lives every year. Medical information was scattered across dozens of disconnected systems, making it nearly impossible for doctors to see the full picture of a patient's condition. Nina believed technology could help solve that problem. So she walked away from security and founded MedLink AI. The first 3 years were brutal, far worse than anyone knew. She poured more than $120,000 of her personal savings into the company. The comfortable lifestyle she once enjoyed disappeared almost overnight. Expensive dinners became fast food meals. Weekend trips disappeared. New clothes became a luxury she couldn't justify. Many nights she survived on rice beans and whatever groceries happened to be on sale that week. Her small apartment doubled as her office. The dining table became a workstation. The couch became a bed whenever deadlines piled up. There were weeks when she worked 20 hours a day and slept only a few hours each night. While her friends attended weddings, vacations, and parties, Nina sat in front of a laptop teaching herself machine learning, data science, and medical informatics. She spent thousands of hours reading research papers, studying hospital workflows, and interviewing doctors who often dismissed her ideas before she could finish explaining them. Some were polite. Others were not. One hospital administrator laughed during a presentation and told her that artificial intelligence had no place in healthcare. Another doctor called her project a fantasy. A third suggested she stop wasting her time and find a real career. Each rejection hurt. Each setback made her question herself. There were nights when she stared at her bank account and wondered whether her family had been right all along. Maybe she was making a terrible mistake. Maybe she should quit. Maybe MedLink AI would become another failed startup statistic. But every time she considered giving up, she remembered why she started. Somewhere patients were suffering because critical information had been overlooked. Somewhere families were losing loved ones because diagnostic errors had gone unnoticed. If there was even a small chance that her technology could help prevent those tragedies, she had to keep going. Then, after years of struggle, everything began to change. In 2020, MedLink AI landed its first client, a small rural hospital in West Texas. It wasn't a prestigious medical center or a nationally recognized healthcare network. It was simply a hospital willing to take a chance on a young entrepreneur with an ambitious idea. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within the first month, MedLink AI's platform identified several diagnostic risks that doctors later confirmed could have become life-threatening if left unnoticed. For the first time, Nina saw proof that her vision could work in the real world. More importantly, lives were being protected. Word spread quickly. Hospital administrators talked to one another. Doctors shared success stories. Healthcare executives began paying attention. What started as one small client slowly became something much bigger. By the end of 2021, MedLink AI was serving 20 hospitals and generating more than $5 million in revenue. For Nina, it felt like reaching the first base camp on a mountain she had been climbing for years. But the climb was far from over. In 2022, growth accelerated dramatically. The company expanded to 180 hospital clients across multiple states and secured major investment funding that allowed Nina to hire engineers, researchers, and healthcare specialists. For the first time, MedLink AI had a real office and a growing team dedicated to the mission. The following year brought another breakthrough. By 2023, MedLink AI was serving 420 hospitals and generating tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue. Investors who once ignored Nina were suddenly competing for meetings. Industry publications began featuring her company as one of the most promising healthcare technology startups in America. Still, most of her family knew almost nothing about it. At family gatherings, they continued asking whether her business was making money. By 2025, the company had become one of the fastest-growing healthcare AI platforms in the country. MedLink AI served 890 hospitals across 43 states, employed hundreds of people, generated more than $340 million in annual revenue, and reached a valuation of $558 million. The mountain she had spent 6 years climbing now towered above the industry. Yet whenever Nina returned home, she was still treated like the relative who had failed. Her family saw the old Honda. They saw the modest apartment. They saw the simple clothes. What they never saw were the hundreds of hospitals relying on her technology, the thousands of medical professionals using her platform, and the countless patients whose lives had been improved because she refused to give up. While they believed she was wasting her future, Nina had quietly built one of the most successful healthcare AI companies in America. By early afternoon, lunch was finally served. Long folding tables had been arranged beneath a canopy of massive oak trees that shaded the ranch from the relentless Texas sun. Plates piled high with carne asada, grilled chicken, rice beans, tortillas, and homemade salsa stretched across the entire length of the gathering. More than 75 members of the Martinez family filled every available seat, their voices blending into a constant wave of laughter, conversation, and celebration. Nina sat quietly near the end of one of the tables, hoping to avoid attention. After years of attending these reunions, she had learned that staying invisible was often easier than trying to explain herself. Around her, relatives exchanged stories about promotions, vacations, new homes, and growing families. Every conversation seemed to revolve around visible success, the kind that could be measured with luxury cars, expensive jewelry, or impressive job titles. Then Gabriella stood up. Almost instantly, the chatter died down. Everyone knew Gabriella loved being the center of attention. She lifted her left hand into the sunlight, allowing the enormous diamond on her finger to sparkle dramatically. A chorus of excited voices erupted. "Let me see it. Oh my goodness, that's beautiful." Carlos did well. Gabriella smiled proudly as family members crowded around to admire the ring. "It's just under 4 carats, she said casually, pretending not to enjoy the attention. "Carlos proposed last month during our trip to Napa Valley." The women gasped. The men nodded approvingly. Someone started applauding. Soon the entire table joined in. Gabriella's smile grew even wider. "We've also finalized the plans for the wedding," she continued. "We're getting married at the Four Seasons in January." More applause. "And we just closed on our new house in Westlake. 4 bedrooms, a pool, and an incredible lake view." The applause became even louder. Her mother wiped away tears of pride. Several relatives immediately began asking for photos. Nina quietly pushed food around her plate while the celebration continued. She wasn't jealous. She was happy for her sister. What bothered her was the contrast. Every accomplishment Gabriella achieved was celebrated. Every milestone was recognized. Every success was treated as proof of her value. Then Miguel received his turn. Their father stood up holding a beer. "I have another announcement," he said proudly. The crowd instantly grew quiet again. Miguel just closed the biggest deal of his career. Cheers erupted before he could continue. A commercial property in downtown Austin worth $8.7 million. The entire table exploded with applause. Several uncles whistled. Miguel stood and took a playful bow as everyone laughed. "That's my son," their father declared proudly. "A future real estate mogul." More applause followed. For several minutes, the conversation revolved around Miguel's success. Question, compliments, admiration, recognition, everything Nina had never received. Eventually, as the excitement settled, Uncle Roberto glanced toward her. "What about Nina?" he asked. The words seemed harmless enough. But within seconds, dozens of faces turned in her direction. Nina felt her stomach tighten. "What about her?" someone asked. Uncle Roberto smiled. "How's the company doing?" The question sounded innocent. But Nina knew what would come next. "It's doing well," she answered politely. "How well?" another relative asked. "Still working on that healthcare technology thing." "Do you actually have customers yet? Are you making money? Do you finally have an office? Or are you still working from coffee shops?" Laughter spread around the table. Not cruel laughter. Not yet. But the kind of laughter that comes from people who have already decided what they believe. Nina forced a smile. "We've made good progress." Gabriella laughed softly. Good progress. Several people looked at her. Gabriella took a sip of wine before continuing. Nina has been saying that for 6 years. More laughter. Nina remained silent. She calls it progress, Gabriella continued. The rest of us call it refusing to admit reality. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Others smirked. Miguel looked down at his plate. Their mother suddenly appeared nervous. Gabby, she warned softly. What? Gabriella shrugged. I'm just being honest. She turned toward Nina. You still live in a tiny apartment. Silence. You drive a 12-year-old Honda. More silence. You wear the same jeans and sneakers you've owned forever. Nina felt dozens of eyes studying her. And after 6 years, Gabriella said with a laugh, you're still doing your little startup. The words hit harder than Nina expected. Not because they were true, but because her sister genuinely believed them. For a moment, Nina considered speaking. She could have told them everything. She could have explained that MedLink AI served hundreds of hospitals. She could have told them about the investors, the revenue, the valuation, the employees, the lives saved. Instead, she remained quiet. Then Gabriella delivered the final blow. Nina is basically a failed entrepreneur. The words landed like a gunshot. The laughter vanished instantly. Every conversation stopped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the children seemed quieter. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire reunion sat in stunned silence. Their mother looked horrified. Gabriella. What? She replied defensively. It's true. No, it isn't. Then prove me wrong, Gabriella said, turning toward Nina. 75 relatives stared at her. Waiting. Watching. Judging. For a brief moment, Nina felt something crack inside her. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Disappointment. Deep, exhausting disappointment. After 6 years, this was what her family thought of her. Not because they knew her story. Not because they understood her work. But because they had never cared enough to ask. Nina slowly placed her fork on the table. She stood. No dramatic speech. No argument. No attempt to defend herself. She simply reached for her car keys. Nina, her father said. Don't leave. Please, her mother added. Gabriella didn't mean. Yes, she did, Nina interrupted gently. The table fell silent again. Gabriella crossed her arms. You're running away. Nina looked at her sister. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Nina gave a small smile. Not an angry smile. Not a bitter one. A sad one. No, she said quietly. I just have work to do. Without another word, she turned and walked away. No one followed her. No one stopped her. The sound of conversation slowly returned behind her as she crossed the ranch toward the parking area. A few minutes later, her old Honda Accord started with its familiar rumble. The same car everyone loved to mock. The same car they believed belonged to a failure. Nina gripped the steering wheel and stared ahead for a moment. Then she shifted into drive. As the ranch disappeared in her rearview mirror and the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, none of the 75 relatives she left behind had any idea that within 48 hours the entire country would learn exactly who Nina Martinez really was. The drive back to Austin was quiet. For 3 hours, Nina barely turned on the radio. The words spoken at the family reunion replayed in her mind over and over again. Failed entrepreneur. Embarrassing. Get a real job. Each sentence felt like a weight pressing against her chest. The irony was almost laughable. Just 24 hours earlier, she had finalized one of the largest funding rounds in healthcare technology that year. Investors from across the country had competed for the opportunity to invest in MedLink AI. Her calendar was packed with meetings. Hospitals were signing contracts faster than her team could process them. And yet, in the eyes of her family, she was still the relative who had wasted 6 years chasing a fantasy. By the time she reached her apartment, the sun had already disappeared behind the Austin skyline. Her phone was flooded with missed calls and text messages. Most were from family members. She ignored them, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. For 6 years, she had tried to explain herself. For 6 years, nobody had listened. Now she simply didn't have the energy anymore. The next morning, however, she forced herself to focus. Monday would be one of the biggest nights of her life. The Forbes 30 Under 30 Healthcare Awards ceremony. The event would be broadcast nationally. Millions of people would watch. For the first time, the world would hear the story behind MedLink AI. Around noon, her stylist arrived carrying several designer garment bags. A makeup artist followed shortly afterward. Then came members of her public relations team. Her small apartment suddenly felt like a backstage dressing room. A navy blue evening gown was carefully placed on the bed. The dress was elegant, sophisticated, and unlike anything Nina normally wore. When she saw the price tag, she laughed. The gown cost more than 3 months of rent from her early startup days. Tonight is a big deal, her stylist reminded her. It doesn't feel real. It will. As the afternoon passed, her team reviewed talking points, interview questions, and media schedules. Reporters from major networks were expected to attend. Investors, executives, founders, industry leaders. People who had spent years following Medlink AI's growth. For the first time all weekend, Nina felt nervous. Not because of the cameras. Not because of the audience. Because part of her knew what would happen once the ceremony aired. Her family would finally discover the truth. And there would be no way to hide it anymore. As evening approached, a black car arrived to take her downtown. The ceremony was being held at the Four Seasons Hotel in Austin. Ironically, it was the same venue where Gabriella planned to host her wedding. The contrast made Nina smile. When the car pulled up to the entrance, flashes exploded everywhere. Photographers crowded behind barricades. Television crews adjusted cameras. Reporters called out questions. For a brief moment, Nina hesitated. Just 48 hours earlier, her own relatives had mocked her for driving an old Honda and living in a tiny apartment. Now she was walking a red carpet alongside some of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. It felt surreal. She stepped forward. The cameras immediately turned toward her. Nina, over here. One photo. Smile. The flashes became almost blinding. She smiled politely while answering questions from journalists representing CNBC, Bloomberg, and several major business publications. Inside the ballroom, more than 600 guests filled the room. Founders, investors, healthcare executives, technology leaders, people whose companies were worth hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. Yet somehow Nina still felt like the same woman who had once spent nights eating rice and beans while trying to keep her startup alive. The ceremony began shortly after 8 o'clock. Award after award was announced. The room applauded. Winners gave speeches. Stories of innovation and perseverance filled the stage. Then the healthcare category arrived. Nina felt her heartbeat accelerate. The host walked to the center of the stage. Our next honoree has transformed healthcare through artificial intelligence. The room grew quiet. The large screens behind the stage displayed the Medlink AI logo. The host continued. Her company now serves 890 hospitals across 43 states. A murmur moved through the audience. They have analyzed more than 400 million patient records. More applause. And their technology is estimated to have helped prevent over 12,000 medical errors in the past year alone. The applause grew louder. Please welcome Forbes 30 Under 30 Healthcare Honoree Founder and CEO of Medlink AI, Nina Martinez. The spotlight found her instantly. For a moment, everything slowed down. The applause echoed around the ballroom. People rose from their seats. She walked toward the stage feeling both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. When she reached the podium, the applause finally settled. Nina looked out across hundreds of faces. Then she began. 6 years ago, I left a secure job to start a company that most people believed would fail. The room became silent. I wasn't trying to build a billion-dollar company. She paused. I was trying to solve a problem. She spoke about diagnostic errors, about patients, about doctors overwhelmed by fragmented information, about the years of uncertainty, the sacrifices, the failures, the moments she nearly quit. Then she reached the part that mattered most. There were many people who thought I was making a mistake. She smiled softly. Some thought I was wasting my life. The audience listened carefully. But if you're building something meaningful, there will always be people who don't understand what you're doing. She looked directly into the cameras. Keep building anyway. A few people nodded. Keep believing anyway. More applause began. Then she delivered the line that would soon spread across the internet. They'll understand eventually. The room became completely silent. And when they do, she paused. It will be on your terms, not theirs. The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the room. People stood. Some cheered. Others wiped away tears. The standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute. By the time Nina walked off stage, she had no idea that millions of viewers watching from home were reacting the exact same way. Backstage, an assistant handed her phone back. The screen looked insane. Notifications appeared faster than she could read them. 100 missed calls. Then 120. Then more. Hundreds of text messages, voicemails, social media alerts, interview requests. Congratulations. She opened the first message. Mom, Nina, call me immediately. The second. Gabriella, what is happening? The third. Miguel, holy, is that really you? More messages arrived every second. Uncles, aunts, cousins, friends, former classmates. People she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had suddenly discovered the truth. The same relatives who believed she was a failed entrepreneur were now watching her receive one of the most prestigious honors in business. As she scrolled through the endless messages, a small smile appeared on her face. Not because she felt vindicated, not because she wanted revenge, but because for the first time in 6 years nobody was questioning whether her dream was real. The results had finally become impossible to ignore. And somewhere back at the ranch, 75 relatives were probably sitting in stunned silence, realizing that the woman they had underestimated for years had quietly become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. The morning after Nina's Forbes appearance, the internet was still talking about her. Clips of her acceptance speech had accumulated millions of views overnight. News outlets were calling. Investors were requesting meetings. Hospital executives were posting messages of congratulations. Everywhere she looked, people seemed fascinated by the story of the healthcare entrepreneur who had quietly built one of the most successful AI companies in America while being underestimated by nearly everyone around her. But none of those reactions surprised her as much as the knock on her apartment door at 9 o'clock the next morning. When Nina looked through the peephole, she froze. Standing in the hallway were her mother, father, Gabriella, and Miguel. For a moment, no one moved. Then Nina opened the door. The confidence that had filled a ballroom of hundreds the night before seemed strangely absent from her family now. They looked exhausted, embarrassed, almost afraid. "Can we come in?" her mother asked quietly. Nina stepped aside without saying a word. As they entered, their eyes wandered around the small apartment they had spent years criticizing. The apartment wasn't luxurious. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't designed to impress anyone. But it was clean, comfortable, and entirely hers. Paid for in full. No mortgage. No debt. No landlord. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, her father broke the silence. "We watched the ceremony." Nina nodded. "All of it." Another nod. Miguel looked genuinely stunned. "The host said your company serves 890 hospitals. That's correct. And you've analyzed more than 400 million patient records." "Yes." Gabriella swallowed hard. "The Forbes article says Medlink AI is worth $558 million. It is." The room fell silent again. Then Miguel asked the question everyone was thinking. "How much of the company do you own?" 54%. His eyes widened. He quickly did the math in his head. The color drained from his face. "Oh my God." Their mother sat down heavily on the couch. For the first time in years, she seemed unable to find words. Finally, she whispered, "I called you a failure." Nina looked at her. "You did." Tears immediately filled her mother's eyes. "And I did it in front of everyone." "You did." "I was wrong." Nina didn't respond. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she wanted to punish anyone, but because 6 years of dismissal could not be erased in a single conversation. Gabriella stepped forward. "I don't know how to apologize for what I said." "You can start by being honest," Nina replied. Her sister nodded. For the first time, there was no arrogance in her voice. No superiority. No need to be the center of attention. Just regret. "We thought you were failing." "I know. We thought we were helping by encouraging you to be realistic." Nina laughed softly. "There was nothing realistic about what you were saying." The room grew quiet. Then she finally said the words she had been carrying for years. "I tried to tell all of you." No one interrupted. "I tried for 6 years." Her voice remained calm. "I talked about my company. I talked about my clients. I talked about our growth. I talked about what we were building." She looked around the room, but nobody listened. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. "You all had already decided who I was." Her father lowered his eyes. Her mother wiped away tears. Miguel stared at the floor. And for perhaps the first time, they truly understood the damage they had caused. Not because they had doubted her, but because they had never taken the time to understand her. Several weeks later, Gabriella called and asked if they could meet for coffee. Nina almost declined, but eventually she agreed. What followed became one of the most important conversations of their lives. After a long silence, Gabriella finally admitted the truth. I wasn't just judgmental, she said quietly. I was jealous. Nina blinked. Jealous? Gabriella nodded. You were brave. Nina stared at her. Her sister laughed bitterly. I took the safe path. She looked down at her coffee. Law school, law firm, promotions, everything planned out. She looked back up. You walked away from security and risked everything for something you believed in. I was terrified. I know. Gabriella smiled sadly. That's what made it brave. For years, Gabriella had convinced herself that Nina's startup would fail. Because if it failed, it justified all of her own safe choices. But if Nina succeeded? Then she would have to confront the possibility that she had spent her life avoiding risks she secretly wanted to take. That realization changed everything. It didn't erase the past, but it helped Nina understand that criticism often says more about the critic than the person being criticized. Slowly, their family began rebuilding trust. Her mother started asking genuine questions about MedLink AI. Her father began reading healthcare articles so he could better understand her work. Miguel proudly introduced her as his sister at every opportunity. And for the first time, their interest felt real. Not performative. Not superficial. Real. Then, 2 years later, another announcement shocked the world. Google Health acquired MedLink AI for $1.8 billion in cash and stock. The company Nina had started alone at a kitchen table had become one of the most valuable healthcare AI platforms in the industry. The acquisition made headlines across the country. Investors celebrated. Employees received life-changing bonuses. Early team members became millionaires. And Nina's own stake made her one of the wealthiest self-made entrepreneurs in healthcare technology. Her family was proud. Incredibly proud. But by then, something important had changed. Nina no longer needed their approval. She had stopped needing that years earlier. What she had wanted all along wasn't validation. It wasn't praise. It wasn't admiration. It was attention. It was understanding. It was the simple act of being seen for who she truly was. Years later, when people asked Nina how it felt to finally prove everyone wrong, she always gave the same answer. I didn't build my company to prove anyone wrong. She built it because she believed in the mission. Because she wanted to help people. Because she refused to quit. The truth was that success had existed long before the world noticed it. Long before the headlines. Long before the interviews. Long before the Forbes cover. Success had been built during the lonely nights. The uncertain years. The moments when nobody believed. The days when she kept going anyway. And that she realized was the lesson. Success does not begin on the day people finally recognize it. Success begins in the years when nobody is watching. When the world eventually sees your value, it doesn't mean you have suddenly become successful. It simply means your success has finally become impossible to ignore. And sometimes the most powerful victory is not proving people wrong. It's becoming so undeniable that their doubts no longer matter.